Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Doctor of Social Sciences Speaker Series. Every year in our doctoral residency, we have a series of speakers, sometimes at night and sometimes during the day. And normally for the daytime speaker series, we try to have one of our colleagues from Royal Roads University speak to us. And it's a pleasure to have Dr. Eileen Piggot-Irvine speak to us today. And to introduce Eileen, I've asked Phil Cady. Phil is in the second year of the doctoral program. He's also a colleague of Eileen's, and Phil has graciously agreed to introduce our distinguished guest. Phil?
I thought, how appropriate. If any of you have seen the poster that's been around campus lately, it says this. It says, "You thought your methodological journey would be a straight road?" ? That's very true of where we are right now. I remember a couple of years ago, well, about a year and a half ago, down in the castle, your job interview. I actually showed up for, I showed up for your job interview. And it was fascinating, and I was quite impressed to see the long list of publications and contributions, and I'd like to share just a little bit of that with you. But before I go ahead and do that, I also want to let you know I have the pleasure of working with Eileen this coming July in the MA in Leadership second residence. So I'm really looking forward to that, because you and I haven't worked together on projects like that. So now a little bit of the formal side. Eileen is a professor of leadership at Royal Roads University and an adjunct at Griffith University, Brisbane. She was formerly director of the New Zealand Action Research and Review Centre, the director of the New Zealand Principal and Leadership Centre, and senior lecturer at Massey University. Prior to 1998, she was the head of the Education Management Centre at Unitec, Auckland, and head of professional development, Northland Polytechnic, and leader in secondary schools. Eileen's current research, her current research, evaluation, and publications are in the fields of appraisal, performance evaluation, leadership development, organizational learning, action research, success case methodology, and management review. Eileen has published 4 books, multiple book chapters, and approximately 50 journal articles, and has presented innumerable keynote speeches. She's currently an editor for International Action Research monograph series. So, colleagues, please join me in welcoming Eileen Piggot-Irvine.
Okay, welcome. I just have to say this before we begin. I told all of the faculty, all of the staff, not to come in our school, but there's a few sneaked in here. Mainly because I had developed this for the doctoral students. It's a presentation for them. So for those of you that are not doctoral students, if you know the moment arrives where you think, no, this is not what I wanted to hear about, please feel free to walk out. I never ever mind that at any time at all. It is lovely to be here, and I guess I'm going to apologise before I start, which is not a good way to begin, because with probably about, I think I added up last night, I've had approximately 20 research contracts / funded, approached, in terms of the way that I've been inducted into research. I've had most of them funded. I've had most of those through grants, the research projects. And for 20 of those, I've had a really difficult time choosing what I might have actually presented to you today. So if I'm going to go fairly quickly through this, you'll probably want to come back to me and say, hey, hang on, slow down, and what did you have about that in a little bit more detail? Don't feel embarrassed about doing that. The other thing that I wanted to explain before I start is that I've deliberately included wherever I can, when I'm talking about a methodology, as many of the publications that I've got related to that methodology, so that I don't need to sort of have I tried not to have a disjointed approach to saying, this is what you might go to look for in success case methodology, for example, as one of the approaches that I've used. So hopefully I've developed something for you here which you can use as a resource to go back to, rather than my needing to go through everything in detail. We've got plenty of time for questions at the end. I just need to keep to time. Probably that's the biggest issue. So I kind of avoided putting that full title that I had in the advertisement for this on the screen, but just to give you an idea about the content, I am going to be talking about really what was and has been quite an unplanned journey on my part. Not necessarily unfocused at times, but certainly unplanned. I did start from a positivistic sort of perspective. I was involved in research into TSH, which is a thyroid stimulating hormone, in endocrinology in a medical research laboratory, and then got a little bit involved in environmental science. I taught a lot of environmental science in my past, and then became more and more involved as I got into leadership positions in leadership and what it is to be an effective leader and the way to look at that and to review it. So the other shift that's happened for me that is a thread throughout the presentation is that I guess I started more with a quantitative approach to research, moved into more of a qualitative approach, so kind of swung from one to the other. And in latter times, I've been quite deliberate in trying to focus on a combination of both in a mixed method design, if you like. So I'm going to talk about some key methodologies that I have used, not all of them, but I picked out 3 of them that I'm going to focus on. And I'm going to elaborate a little further with a thread that runs through all of the latter work that I've done in the last 15 years, which is to do with action research and a subset sometimes described as action science within that. I'll give you some examples of that very quickly and then talk a little bit at the end about a couple of new journeys that I'm on in terms of another kind of swing off in another direction or an intensification in terms of direction. Okay, so I'm going to flick these 2 next slides up fairly quickly because it's really just a historical account of what I've been doing. I had quite some fun doing this, by the way, trying to think about, what was my role when I was involved in the sort of positivistic, scientific sort of world. You know all of these words. If you don't, please just say, what does that mean, all right? Don't ever hesitate to ask. So I really was in a very distant test tube-like kind of environment when I started. And I can remember making an active choice and saying one day, I don't want to spend my life looking down a test tube. I really like people. This is the wrong place for me to be. So that got me involved in teaching and the scientific application through environmental science. So the process, as you can see in that kind of environment, as you all know from the work that you're doing around methodologies at the moment, is primarily summative and definitely a low ownership model in terms of participatory or change process or in fact any kind of development at all. So this even gets more complex. But this is where I've been in the last 15 years. Reasonably different to where I started from. And I just want to pick out a couple of things here to amplify maybe some slightly more vague descriptions that I've got on the screen. I want to swing down to, I know this has got a cute little pointer here. So I'm coming down to this one here. All right. I have got a fascination, really, that's the only way to describe it, with developmental type approaches to research where there is some implementation or action associated with the research. And part of my learning and part of the work that I do when working collaboratively with people in that research is that I am striving constantly for what I call and others call double loop learning and triple loop learning. DLL and TLL is what that describes there. So just as a quick aside, double loop learning is where we are moving towards wanting to shift not just the superficial that somebody might be thinking at, but a deeper level, a more values-based level that they might be thinking at. So triple loop learning is taking that to another level altogether and wanting to shift more than the individual and the person to a much, much deeper values base. So if you follow Marilyn Taylor's work with the values-based leadership material, this really fits, the TLL really fits tightly within that kind of realm. So all of the work that's talked about on that screen is all part of what I've called and others call developmental research of some kind. And that might involve evaluative research or other types as well. Action research certainly falls within this. Okay, so I don't think I want to really elaborate anything unless anybody wants to ask anything about anything on that screen. The goal is longer term developmental, keep in mind. So I guess there is a little bit of a foolish attempt on my part now, currently, to try to combine those two last sets of thinking. For a long time, for about 15 years, I was involved just in developmental research approaches, and latterly I'm moving much more towards thinking that I want to combine in a mixed method approach, both qualitative and quantitative. So not just developmental, but a little bit more of a hard edge to some of the stuff as well. Okay, so to talk a little bit more about the scope of things that I've been involved in, I'll just put all of these up. And I'm sticking to just 3 realms here, not 3 methodologies. I'll explain that. So one of the areas that I've had quite an interest in is success case methodology. That is a methodology. So success cases and just some of the contract work, the research work that I've been involved in, quite a bit of work around Indigenous community with success case methodology. I could go into a lot of detail with this, but there's, as some of you will know already, and probably everybody in the room already knows, it's a very precarious environment to go into if you're non-Indigenous, to actually work with community on something that might be in any way contentious. And I have found, certainly with some of the contracted research that I've done, that a success case approach, which is looking at what is successful, what has been effective, is an incredibly good entry into some of those Indigenous communities. So drawing on the work in this material with success cases, particularly from Brinkhoff's work, a number of different authors that have written around that field. I think probably, has anybody ever done a success case methodology? If you're interested in that, you can look at some of the material I've got on this that I've included when I give you a little bit of a briefing at the end about some papers that are associated. I can point anybody in the direction of some of this material. I found that a fascinating approach to use, particularly with resistant communities. And the argument against it is fairly obvious. So then when do you look for the things that are not successful? And I've written, one of the papers that I wrote was really a critique of that on its own. I have never ever engaged in a success case methodology approach where I didn't hear all the you-know-what associated with what was going on as well. So it's kind of the safety around the positivity seems to create an opportunity for people to be incredibly honest as well. Very interesting, particularly the last one that I've got on that list, some Board of Governor work in terms of effectiveness using success cases as well. But it unravelled some incredibly deep, unsuccessful strategies that are in place as well. Okay, so methodology, success case, and not methodology, evaluation research. And just to qualify that, evaluation research has got methodologies within it. For example, I have adapted action research to become an evaluation action research EAR approach. There is no set standard nomenclature that's called a methodology of evaluation work. So a lot of contracts in that work, and I haven't got them all listed here, but that's just some of the most rewarding ones, if I can say that, and the ones that I had most publications out of. Particularly love doing the South African Pacifica work. Fabulous work with community again. So action research, which is the bit that I'm probably best known for, quite a lot of work that I've done in that area, as you can see there, which is a methodology. So again, the top two are methodologies in terms of the way that you might categorise these things. So I'm not going to go into a lot of detail. I've highlighted a couple of them there in yellow that I am going to take a little bit of a deeper dive with to show you the sort of material that I've worked with. But just very briefly, my first piece of research that I ever conducted that I published in the sociological qualitative field was associated particularly with creating what in some of my writing have been called non-defensive interactions. So working with people, trying to find out how they interact, which is either defensive or non-defensive, and then because I'm really keen on action research, the goal for me has always been to move them beyond just the criteria establishment, beyond the analysis of that, but to how do we actually make some improvements and implement some change and then evaluating that afterwards. So there's a thread that's going to come through that I'm going to amplify, which is about that defensive, non-defensive, sometimes called non-defensive, sometimes called productive approach to learning and thinking. So that was my doctoral work. I did that work in the performance management context, probably the worst environment context that you could ever want to walk into in terms of the way that defensiveness is raised immediately when people walk into the room. So it was a very contentious thing to do. I have a story that I tell about one group that I worked with when I went in to ask if I could actually use them as a site for the research. And at the end of the meeting, I said to the guy that was in charge of this organisation, do you think it might have helped if I bought a raincoat and then you could have just sprayed me all over at the beginning? I mean, I made a joke of it, but it was just that sort of environment that I was walking into. They were so resistant about having anybody look inside what was going on. So fascinating material. But a whole lot of other things that you can see there. You know, I've got really involved in leading a university-wide action research development program for staff. We had, in 2011, 16 projects. That would have been about 50 staff involved in those projects throughout the university. So I'll get back to these other ones that I've highlighted, but then just at the end, I'm going to come back to those last two because my new directions are in kind of this mixed method approach that I'm talking about. That is combined with action research. So are you kind of thinking about that? Okay, so moving along. I want to get to the detail here. I want to take a little side alley for a moment and talk about the two things that are the threads through everything that I'm going to talk about for the three examples, or the two examples. So action research, you can define that in a multitude of ways. You'll probably find for every book a different perspective, a different way of describing this. It's very difficult to pin down. So I have a model that I've been using, and I'll show you that model, but basically most action research is cyclic, and you know this, and it's collaborative, and most action research has a kind of preface, issue identification, followed by what I call a reconnaissance, which is how do you find out what's going on currently before you do anything, and fiddle with anything and change anything. Then improvements, implementations, and then followed by an evaluative stage after that. That's not a one-shot cycle, right? So that goes on and on and on and on. It might be 15 cycles that you do along the lines of those ongoing cyclical iterative actions. So the approach that I've adopted in action research is a little different to what other people have sometimes described. I've got, probably because of the positivistic background that I've got a really strong need to have evidence-based, informed, data-based back up for what I'm collecting the data on. So not all action researchers are quite that inclined. They're not so strong on the evidence, but I am, so I'm owning up to that at the outset. So this is what I was talking about with I've included where I've got specifics around some of these topics. You can go back and find any of that information in those articles without my going into detail. So the next slide just shows you the model that I developed originally with another colleague and then readapted it. We called it the Problem Resolving Action Research Model, PRARIE. I probably wouldn't use the problem word in there now, but you know, that's what I started with and that's what I became known for. So everyone still kind of talks about this model in their writing when I've got people I've taught how to do this. But that's what I was describing before by cyclical and iterative. And if you know anything about action research, you know, like it's got a whole lot of other people's ideas in there, like the spin-offs that come to the side, G. McNiff's work, etc. So the second thread, action research is something that's dominated everything that I've done for 15 years. There's a second thread that dominates as well, and I kind of alluded to this when we were talking about when I went into work in the performance management, the appraisal context, working with people on defensive and non-defensive ways that they operated. So that work that's centred around non-defensiveness and defensiveness and how to overcome that, all of that material actually falls under the heading of something called action science. If you haven't heard that before, a lot of people don't actually know about the connection between action science and what non-defensive, defensive, etc. is about productive. In the middle of all of that material, probably the most significant word in anything that I have ever done with research is the word dialogue. So I'm constantly working both with myself when I'm working with action research with people and with teaching other people developmentally with action research. I'm constantly working on the feedback, interactive, dialogical process. And that is complex. I don't want to go into the detail here, but I flipped a whole lot of references onto this about that because it has got huge meaning, the word dialogue. It's no simple kind of, this is what it is in one sentence. However, having said that, basically a non-defensive way of operating involves two things. A defensive way of operating, can I just deal with that first, is about avoidance of problems or issues and or control. Two ways of operating. It's much more detailed than that. I'm not going to go into the detail again, but just to alert you to the fact that if you're talking about action science or defensiveness or non-defensiveness or productive, other people call it, or dialogue, all of those words are wrapped up with whether people are avoiding or controlling in conversations. So where one area of fascination has been centred for me is when I'm working with leadership teams, probably the recurring problem that I've had to face with every leadership team I've ever interacted with, I don't mean working with, I mean doing consultancy or process work with. In every situation I have always, without any, not even one, situation where this was not the case. With every single case, I have ended up in that work coming back to that there were bullying things that were going on, which is defensiveness, or there were avoiding things that were going on, which is defensiveness, all right? So most issues in organisations that I've ever had anything to do with pretty much come down to some core stuff about the way that people interact. So I think, just to kind of preface what I'm going to talk about with the contract work that I've done, this is strong in what I've done. So some examples. I thought I'd just show you a little bit of a kind of a snatch of some things that I've done. Maybe I'll show you the next slide first. Some of the loveliest work that I've done with community is with people who are trying to improve something, whatever it happens to be. And I was invited as part of a Lotteries Commission contract piece of research to lead a group of people who were therapists, music therapists, to lead them in the way that they improved the way that they did goal setting with their clients, with their students. Not only young children like this boy, but like from 3-year-olds right through to 70-year-olds that they were working with. So if you're familiar with the music therapy kind of, is anybody familiar with music therapy? Anybody had an experience of that you have, Colin? So there's usually in the practice of music therapy, there's a really strong element of setting the goal of what needs to be improved with the client, the child or adult, whoever they are, with the family particularly, and then coordinating that in terms of what the therapist is doing. Quite a complex thing. It's not as simple as just, somebody who has uncomplicated needs. There's always a lot of other people involved, other therapy groups involved as well, or specialists. So this particular group of people, there were 7 of them, 7 people working in this unit, a little therapy unit, invited me to guide them in an action research project right the way throughout, because they felt very unclear about whether what they were doing with their clients was actually hitting the mark with the goal therapy that they were using. So they developed, I'll go backwards again now, they developed a very intensive action research project, which meant they had to review all the literature about goal setting and goal review, and then through a process that I've shown you on that action research spiral, they did a reconnaissance, current situation analysis on what goals were, how caregivers thought those goals were working, all of the kind of ramifications you can think of, interviewed people, surveyed people, did some observations of what was going on in the therapy room, And then they implemented some pretty well thought out changes and improvements to what you're doing as a result of that, and then evaluated that afterwards. So very simple. What's been lovely for me, all of these people that are on that list at the bottom there were 2 others as well who had left in the middle, just gone to another place, but all of those people, apart from myself, had never published, never written, never ever done anything that was anything like research before. And they published this paper at the end of it. I am so proud of these guys. And that applies to anybody that I've worked with that's never done anything published-wise. The joy, what they get out of it is just like this rising pride. As some of you will too, when you first publish something out of your work. So that for me is like just pure joy. Beautiful people. Another kind of similar thing, so I won't spend so much time on this one, similar sort of situation. 7 group of principals had invited me to do a very similar thing, but not with goals this time. They wanted to improve the way that they overcame defensiveness because a number of them had been accused of being bullied by their staff. So being accused of being a bully as a senior leader, a principal, is a pretty severe thing to happen. It led to the cluster, they were called, in their community, deciding that they would do a little bit of research around this and an action research project. So same thing as what the other group did. We involved in literature review, criteria establishment, finding out what the current situation was, all of the other things, implementation, evaluation at the end. And this group as well never had published anything before. So they got a monograph published, admittedly in my monograph series. But that doesn't matter. Like, this has gone out to the world. It's an international monograph series. And they were incredibly proud of that. The best moment for me with this group was I was away somewhere. In fact, it might have been about the time I came over here to do my interview. I was given an invitation to do a keynote to talk about what they had been doing, and I couldn't be there. And so they presented this on their own without me anywhere in sight. And like, they got accolades for it from everybody. So that was kind of like, the pride that comes from this is just, it's like, I get much more of a buzz from other people doing well with this now. So this one I'm going to spend a little bit more detailed time on, not too much longer, but this is a biggie. This was huge. This is probably the biggest research contract work that I've done. 175 aspiring principals, they were called, aspirants, so just keep that word in mind, invited to apply for and then selected for a national program to become principals in schools. You can see I've had a bit of an education bent with some of this stuff. A really good leadership development program, a lot of money nationally put in by the National Ministry of Education to actually get this program up and running. And so I proposed that we would do this as an action research evaluation approach for a piece of research. They advertised it as a pure quantitative piece of research. And I said, okay, I'm going to offer something different here. Would you be prepared to try that? I had a little bit of a track record with some of them, so they said, fortunately, okay, let's go with that. And so for this program, which had complex elements, as you can see, quite a number of things going on, 175 people in 5 different sites, so another level of complexity. Lots of complexity about who was involved. Had lead teams, steering groups, governing groups, National Ministry office people, coordinators for the program, facilitators for the program, and then the aspirants or the participants. So lots of complexity around it. So I negotiated with them that I would use action research and engage as many people collaboratively from those groups as I could to be part of the planning, the design, and the way that we carried out the research. And I got a very cautious yes to doing this. They were very worried that this was going to run amok because too many complex things going on, too many people involved, worried about what might happen with the data and how it might be disseminated. If the program didn't work, in other words, the National Ministry would look very dirty if it started to get around the community. So that was the kind of background to it, very murky environment with some people that were involved in it. So I'm just going to summarise. So probably the key thing is under the data collection component here. We used 3 surveys: beginning, pre-beginning, midpoint, endpoint surveys to all of the aspirants and their managers. So everyone, they only had one person above them, all of these aspirants would have been the principal in their school. Then had interviews, focus groups, phone interviews, face-to-face interviews and focus groups with just about everybody that we could possibly find, including other groups of aspirants, but I've just included here the facilitators particularly, so that's a big point. We did documentary analysis of everything we could find, particularly looking for what espousals there were about what was intended in the program, and then we were going to check how that played out in practice. Our observations were focused on that. Very important point, that last point. So all of that was done collaboratively and consultatively. A lot more expensive for the ministry to have that going on than if they just had me come in, which is what they wanted, to do the check, 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 and I can write a quantitative analysis report. Surveys maybe, yeah? Okay, so there are 2 things that were distinctive about this piece of research. The first was we had an incredibly rigorous data collection process with a mixed method design. I'm not going to go into the detail of that, but mixed methods are fascinating. There's a huge debate, and probably some of you are in the middle of this. I know Phil is at the moment, totally in the middle of it, about whether it's, you know, if you're mixing things together, you're not pure, non-purist debate. And then at the other end of the continuum, the debate is, well, if you're not mixing things together, you know, you're not pragmatic and wholesome enough and open enough to what might be going on qualitatively and quantitatively. So that was a pretty distinctive thing, the mixed methods thing. And if you're interested in that in detail, the paper that I've included there, which is the first one on that list, which one is it? The third one on the list. A young guy that I had working with me, Howard Youngs, lovely young man, who is now an expert in mixed methods, lovely developmental opportunity for him to be involved in this. But he headed up that paper for the Mixed Methods Journal, which is a very difficult journal to get into. First paper published for him in one of the top ranked journals in the world. Very proud moment. So if you want to find out more about what we did, it was a convergence design, multi-phase design. I'll show you that in a moment, but just look into that paper. The second thing that was distinctive about this particular approach, which is where my fascination is that I wanted, with one site only, to be able to haul out every facilitator as soon as they'd finished facilitating, and have, going back to that action design and the action science approach I talked about, have a very open dialogue with them about evidence, about what I had seen, what was observed, what the focus group said, what the surveys said, comparing what they said they were going to do, their espousals, with what I saw in practice in the room. I could go into a lot of detail about this. There's a paper on this that I've included here, Overcoming Evaluation Blindness. This had never, ever been done in New Zealand in a research contract before. So I hit quite a wall with acceptance of doing this. And I had a little bit of resistance from 2 facilitators when we started, who one of them walked in and said, when we sat down, he'd already got the word that I was doing this with everybody straight after they'd facilitated. He said to me, "You think I'm going to sit down here and have a conversation with you about what I've just done? That's not part of what I bought into." So I let him talk, and then we had a little bit of a further conversation about that, about, you know, that I was wanting him to start talking about what was going on. And he was the guy that wrote at the end of this contract, "I don't think I've ever grown so much in any facilitation as what I did with what happened in this program." Wasn't just that feedback, but a whole lot of other things happened as well. So you can see this was quite a different way to approach incorporating action science principles within the action research within a complex evaluation context. Okay, and I thought I'd just show you, talk about complexity. This was the design. This is taken out of that mixed methods, so I'm just kind of showing you that before I talk about the other feedback process. Complex layers, phases, dum 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 dum, all the way from the beginning, phase 1, through to the end. A lot of different things going on, a lot of data that we collected. Used quite a lot of complex statistical analysis around the data. But it's the feedback one that I'm still most fascinated with, and I want to show you why. So I've already mentioned this. One site only had that intensive feedback process, and that was totally different to anything that had happened before. That was kind of like, you know, the premises. Nobody thought they had anything that they needed to discuss. That's what that guy thought when we walked in together. Okay, so I just thought I think I'll let you just read that and then I'll debrief it. So we had lots of stats, remember. We probably had, well, I can say that quite specifically actually, we had 20 criteria that we were evaluating right the way throughout. This is quite a high number for one site to have significantly higher ratings than other sites. In fact, the site that had the intensive feedback had nothing that was a lower rating than anybody else. They were on the mean, or these ones were higher than the mean for, and that was using, as I've mentioned here, a Wilcoxon sign ranks test. So significantly different findings. When I submitted this to the Mixed Method Journal, when Howard and I did, the Mixed Method Journal said, what? How can you prove that, right? And so we piled more stats into the paper, and if you read the paper you'll see that, to demonstrate that we had significant difference to show them. From my perspective, this was incredibly convincing information. So not only were the ratings higher, but there were some other things that were different as well. Overall, the aspirants in that site said that they were more confident, which I think was the bottom line really, about applying for a principalship position. That was really what we were trying to do with the program. But they also had a higher response rate because they were more engaged and they were more, you know, what do you call that? It's the Matthew effect, isn't it? More intense observation, they get more involved in things. Anyway, so moving on from that, incredibly good feedback from the National Ministry Office. But, you know, obviously that's not just enough. A lot of words come out of the Ministry Office. But what we wanted to see was whether they would even consider employing this kind of approach in subsequent evaluation design or research design, and they did the following year. So that's when I was leaving, and I know that it's worked the second year as well, so I'm really thrilled about that. Actually, this program, the evaluation was over an 18-month period, so it was only last year that the other one was imported. So really what we're talking about is, you know, engaging with people, deeply engaging with people and with the right people as well. So I thought that I would just spend 2 minutes here, 2 or 3 minutes, talking about what I'm getting fascinated with now. Not a very, my journey never seems to stand still, so I guess this is a reflection of that. One of our core faculty here at Royal Roads has got me really hooked into neuro-leadership at the moment. So I'm off on another tangent, but I'm actually marrying that with some work that I've already done, which I haven't written up yet. I've become really interested in goal setting and how you help people to goal set. And I had a clutch of schools in New Zealand who invited me to do some goal setting work with them. So I thought I'd just show you a couple of slides of what they were doing. But I've now added on to that all of the neuro-leadership stuff, and I'm starting to get really interested in the match between what I've been doing and what the findings are showing with what the neuro-leadership material is saying as well. The second thing that we have to mention is that we have a new project that's hopefully going to fly, and we called it a Pacific RIM action research and leadership impact evaluation, which is a bit of a mouthful, with Bernard's help, because Bernard is part of the team. We've abbreviated that to a little acronym called PRARIE, so we're a bit of a prairie dog group. But, there's loads and loads and loads of action research that's been developed, but very, very little that's been evaluated very thoroughly, and particularly leadership-oriented action research. So this is what this project is about. 6 of us internationally working together all around the Pacific Rim, and we're looking at projects all the way around the Pacific Rim. So with a lot of support from the research office and Mary Bernard and people that have pulled out the stops totally at Royal Roads. We've just all got our fingers crossed at the moment. We've got a shirt granting for this. So anyway, I thought I'd just show you, just to finish, this lovely work that I've been doing with these schools back in New Zealand that I'm adding the neuro leadership stuff onto. Little school combined with 4 other schools in the area, but it was this school that I took the data from. Wanted to get a much better goal setting process going on between the children, a bit like the one in the music therapy really. Better process, better communication between the children, the teacher and the families, the caregivers, in terms of what goals children are setting. We're talking about little kids here, not big kids. So goal setting was our focus. I can tell you a story about this, but I haven't got time. Maybe at the end I'll tell you about this slide. Fabulous, overwhelming results that we're getting out of the data at the moment about the way that the children have responded, the way that the parents are interacting much more meaningfully with the teachers in the school, and lovely interaction in terms of the way the teachers are working together as well as a goal of this. So nice stuff that's going on. And just to make the link with neuro leadership, so what they're doing without knowing it is actually following some principles of neuro leadership, which is why I'm becoming fascinated with the linkage here. So they put all over little banner, little I don't know what you call them, but they've got little central pillars in the middle of the classroom. They've got everything plastered there with the goals. They've got goals plastered on the desk of the students. They've got them plastered on the walls as well. And so in neuroscience, there's good material that's coming out about the way the brain changes when you have stickiness, an antecedent to change. Stickiness means that you're seeing it constantly, right? So this is what this is doing, but I'm starting to make the links myself now. In neuroscience also, I'm going to flick through this one and just show you this. In neuroscience also, there's a huge statement and research going on around the way that when people work in groups where there's social inclusion and inclusivity, the brain starts triggering. We all know that, we like to belong, right? So the brain starts getting kind of a dopamine effect and starts triggering some much, much more attuned and much more focused activity. And so I have worked with this particular one school, that's the site that I'm doing a dark coaching on, to help them develop a self-assessment, self-attainment scaling system that the teacher, the parent, or parents and caregivers, and the children all have to fill out together. This is what the teachers did together, but it's really a scaling system called a GAS scaling, and it's looking at scaling from 0, which is there's no response whatsoever or nothing much is happening with this particular element, through to -2, which is this is not being attained in any way at all, through to +2, which is there's a high level of attainment in terms of what this goal is about. So there's a whole lot of different elements. I won't go into the detail, other than to say GAS has never been used in an educational context before. It comes out of a medical model used with psychotherapy patients who want to focus on goals. So new material, that with neuroscience, kind of stretching the limit of what's going on. Anyway, so lots of good things coming out of that, lots of nice things. We haven't written any of that up yet. So I'm kind of here with what I'm learning about neuroscience and how I can combine that with what we're doing in terms of the goal attainment scaling and goal attainment itself. And then I thought I'd just end with this one, which is the prairie dog one, the Pacific Rim one. So lots of nice things going on. Okay, through. Probably 80% of it there. questions. Anything you want me to go back to, just ask. It's pretty fast.
So,
Yeah.
something like the one you were just talking about with the school,
Yeah.
how do the people who study from an educational perspective see you as coming in and bringing methodology that's not out of an educational, necessarily out of an educational background?
I don't know. It's an honest answer. I have no idea. Actually, maybe just going backwards slightly, when I talked about I've worked with quite a lot of big groups developing action research and embedding it within organisations, that school that is the data collection school is part of a group that I had 25 schools involved in a region in New Zealand. So that was maybe 6 or 7 years ago. So I guess I had some track record with them. And so when I said to them, hey, I knew they were talking about doing goal setting with children. I knew that it was the principal's one of their performance targets for the year. So I said to her, asked her whether she'd be okay about my coming in to work with them on it as well. And she's actually coming over here next year to visit, look at schools, talk about what she's been doing as well. And hopefully we'll be far enough ahead with the data collection on this and with the neuroscience understanding that I'm building to progress it a little bit further beyond that. So I don't know whether that was an answer, but yeah. Most of my research is because most of the contract work that I've had, one is because I've had other relationships previously with people doing other things.
Do any of your schools have the democratic school model as part of your population? The participatory action, participatory parent school systems?
Yes, they do.
You do have some in your council?
Without going into, I could spend hours talking about this. There is a model in New Zealand for governance, which is a participatory model. So they have boards of trustees, which are all parents, plus the principal, who has probably a lesser role on the board of trustees. That's the governing body. There is no regional body, right, that oversees what's going on in the schools. There's a national set of principles that need to be followed, but everything is devolved down to the level of local governance. It is the most participatory model in the world that I know of. And people from New Zealand have come over in floods to Canada to talk about that. Yeah.
I'm interested in the action component of your action research because, as you put up there, it is usually an iterative process in which you come up with an idea and you put it into practice and then you evaluate and so on.
Over and over and over and over and over.
What are your thoughts, though, on a project that really, in order to put the action in place and evaluate it, would be over a much longer term? Would you still consider it action research if you built to the point of coming up with recommendations for action, even though it'll be a later study to look several years down the road at the result?
Well, this is a really good question, isn't it, Catherine? Because we've got our students in our master's program have a model that they're using, which is an organisational action research model. You're going to have to shut me up if I say anything wrong here. So that model is an engagement model. It's an early.
Yes.
It's actually the reconnaissance phase only, which I've talked about with the group. And so we're having quite some debate at the moment about the engagement and how you move on from, how you show that you're moving on from recommendations into the next phase, which is the implementation phase. So our students are not going to implementation.
Well, that's my project is looking like that. And as I talk about using PAR, I'm having some anxieties about the word action being in there, given that that's the next phase.
Do you want to respond, Catherine? Because we all have some quite strong ideas about this. As far as I'm concerned, I'll be honest, I'm very transparent. It's not action research unless it's got action, all right? So you could call it a lot of other things, but we're in the middle of this debate at the moment. Do you want to comment, Catherine? You don't have
How
to.
about an offline comment? We can have a further conversation later.
Yeah.
Eileen, if I may, on that note, Wendy, if we're looking at measures of authenticity within the
Yeah.
action research process,
Yeah.
wouldn't it be catalytic to one of the criteria by simply engaging the participants
Yeah.
in the discovery phase, if you will, or the
Yeah.
reconnaissance phase?
Yeah.
And would that still be considered
Yeah.
action in and of itself?
Yeah, and I'm being a little facetious with my quick response to that because that is what we're working on at the moment. I'm not coming in to say, oh, you can't have that and that's not this, you know. So we're working on a slight amendment to the model at the moment, which is called ARE instead of what it was previously. And ARE is Action Research for Engagement, all right? Which takes it to the recommendations for improvement phase, but still is inclusive of a lot of the wonderful principles of action research, which is about collaboration and using that dialogue, action science stuff that I was talking about is pivotal to action research, because in a group, if you've got defensive things going on, you don't have action research going on. It's not open enough, yeah? So, yeah, good point, Phil.
Just on mixed
Yeah.
methods. So is that just qualitative and quantitative, and are they somehow mixed together, or
Yeah.
are they two streams?
Totally. Let me go back. Completely. We call the model that we developed, and I haven't got the full model here. Oh no, is it further back than that? We called it a convergence model because there is, and we've described it in the paper as almost simultaneous. We had quantitative data being collected, we had qualitative data being collected. We had some informing from the quantitative data for what the qualitative data needed to be collected later. So there were these backwards and forwards going on all the way throughout that process, from the beginning right the way through to the end. So there was nothing totally predetermined before we started. We used 4 different statistical tools in the analysis, so it was quite complex in terms of the analysis of the data statistically, but what we were looking for, if you want to describe it under what, I think it was Creaswell and Plano-Clark, but you can correct me, Phil. I think those 2 authors called it the pragmatist approach, which is that you're looking at how can we get the best out of this? How can we be practical about what we're doing here? And that was our intention. How could we be solid and evidence-based, but also getting all the richness of the depth of the qualitative responses as well? I can, the paper is listed on here, so you've got, I'm letting whoever can circulate these when they have them, so that, yeah. So you can find that paper, because it's all described in there, all right? Kent.
Hi, Eileen. Thanks. Great informative talk. The beautiful thing with action research is the change for action. And as a facilitator, and you talked about the evaluation blindness, where you're an actor in the process of collaboration, can you just talk to about some of the things to watch out?
That obviously that's what the ministry was so worried about, yeah? They didn't believe, and a lot of evaluators don't believe, a lot of researchers don't believe, that you can actually do some work developmentally, informatively with people and still make summative point decisions during the research. So the ministry was very, very worried about my having that kind of insider, much more than just collecting the data, but giving feedback as well. There is nothing in the evidence that suggests that that was problematic. And I was very, very concerned about that myself. Consciously, always trying to use that action science dialogue process to be explicit about what I was doing with every tier involved in the process. So I don't know whether, does that answer what you're asking there, Kent?
Yeah, I was just asking,
Very.
How do you keep the bias out of that as being an actor in the collaborative change? And I guess you touched on it.
I guess you can't, like one of the things about action research is to acknowledge that there's always bias. But the more transparent you are about what's going on, obviously you're not necessarily reducing the bias, but at least you're being explicit about that bias and people are aware of it, yeah? Yeah. I mean, well, actually I have to say that I really wanted to put into practice something that I'd been coaching people in. I did it in a lot of other contexts, but not a research context. So I wanted to put in place this within a research context. So it was a pretty exciting thing for me to be involved in doing that. Any other questions?
Eileen, do you ever worry that, or do you have any hesitancy about using electronic surveys in action research? Are they too far removed from the subjects of your research? No. Not a hesitancy at all?
Absolutely none. Because we had, you know, when I listed all the things that we did, we had focus groups, we had telephone interviews, I had the one-to-one with people in the feedback process. I didn't feel in any way at all that they had kind of a method in the survey process that was, you know, alien to what it was that we were trying to intend here. I wanted to use mixed methods. I wanted to get some really good clinical detached data, as well as the more involved responsive data. Yeah, okay.
Well, Eileen, on behalf of us all, especially the Doctoral Social Sciences program, thank you very much for sharing this very important body of information, and also for telling us how your academic career involved an impressive career and a good sort of paradigm for all of us to think about as we, and it still is evolving too, which is
sure is.
very nice to hear.
With you.
Thank you very much for doing this, by the way, and on our, as a token of our appreciation, this is for you, and thank you again. That was thank you all.
Yes, thank you.